All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Artist Spotlight here with my guest tonight, Raymond Bonilla. Very excited for this. This is a fabulous artist and somebody that I would happily call my friend. Um, Ray does a number of things. He does so many things well. It's hard to identify. I don't know. I'm going to call him an artist that does that paints for galleries, does illustration work, has done a lot of illustration work, has won all kinds of accolades from the Society of Illustrators, from SILA, Communication Arts, has a number of galleries that represents him, and just a great explainer of what he does. And he's also a marvelous teacher. So, Raymond, welcome. Say hi.
Thanks so much, John. Hi, everyone.
I'm
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here.
I always love to grab a few images that I think just are that really nail me, and these three pieces, and there's many more, but I just have to. I don't know if I know you're going to show some work, and you'll probably show them again, but I want to make sure these three get shown. I just absolutely love them. Something is, that's the Diebenkorn sink to me. Something as ordinary as I assume those are gas meters,
Yeah,
and something as ordinary as that, as mundane as that, you made really beautiful, and just absolutely love it.
thanks, man.
Gorgeous stuff, absolutely. Um, we're going to be talking about a lot of things tonight, but we're going to start off. Ray's going to show some work, show some influences, and steal it from me, Ray, whenever you want the screen,
Awesome.
because I know
Okay.
you have kind of a planned deck of images to show.
All right, let's do it.
First of all,
Oh,
I'm going to ask you, are you able to steal it?
yep.
There you go. First of all, I'm going to ask you, I know where you're located. Where are you located?
I'm currently in Buffalo, New York, is my current area of residence.
And where did you grow up?
So I grew up originally in Richmond Hill, New York, which is a suburb of Queens. Um, and yeah, then I went up. I found or I arrived in Buffalo because I went to SUNY Fredonia, which is just a small state school to the west, southwest of Buffalo, actually near like Erie, Pennsylvania, as for undergrad, and that's where I met my now wife, and then from there I bounced to San Francisco for a while and uh, studied illustration um, at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, and
And
then I
but
moved back to Buffalo.
you got your MFA there, correct?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
Originally, I was going to go there for a 3D character animation.
And what changed your mind?
At my last year in undergrad, I actually took. I really wanted to get into Pixar, right? And so that's the reason why I wanted to move to San Francisco because they were in Emeryville, right across the bridge. And so I was listening to a either on a forum or something like that, or listening to like a behind the scenes of one of the Pixar movies, and somebody had said that like they don't even at the time when they were hiring people, they said they looked at their sketchbooks first for figure drawings, and they didn't even bother looking at their demo reel until they liked their figure drawings first. So they said this, it's like we could tell a lot. And this was a 3D, animation studio. So they said we could tell a lot about the artists by how they draw the figure from their figure drawings, so that if they're not that great, or they don't have what we were looking for, we don't bother looking at the reel. So I was like, oh my god, I have to learn how to draw. So I went to a buddy of mine and said, well, what are the best drawing classes? And at the time he said, well, don't take the drawing classes because they're not the best drawing classes are the illustration courses. And so that's when I enrolled in a bunch of illustration courses taught by Alberto Ray, who was at the time head of the illustration and painting department. And then I caught the bug from him. It was like our textbook was the education of an illustrator by Marshall Arisman and Stephen Heller, and like I just engulfed that book. It was like incredible. And then
Killer book. Great information.
yeah.
And you were, in San Francisco, I know you were surrounded by a lot of good artists that teach there. And I shouldn't say that because there's a lot that still teach there, but especially then
Yeah.
there was some really, and even before,
Yeah.
there were some really amazing people that taught there.
Hey,
I have a couple early
Hey.
questions, like,
Ray, can you bump your audio like 15%?
Sure. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Ray's
Is
being
that
very
better?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. And
Yeah,
I'll have it up here.
sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't need to be timid tonight, Ray. Yeah, just I have, this is, again, you and I have talked a lot about, I'm fascinated with people's backgrounds of how they developed. I mean, I had this really, I'm the oddball out, really. I had this really unusual exposure to the arts at a very young age, and being around the illustration world and painting world when I was young. And I'm always just fascinated, because it was so hard for me to do it. I'm always fascinated when somebody figures it out without all the benefit of being around that. So
Yeah.
my first real question to you is like, when did you discover you could be an artist? I mean,
Well,
as an occupation.
I always love the arts. My father used to collect comic books, and he'd come home. He worked next to a comic book shop. He used to be a manager for Radio Shack, and there must have been a comic book store like right next to his store. So he would pop in and grab a bunch of comic books and then bring them home. And I caught wind of that, and I just fell in love with that. And I grew up around the time in the 90s, 80s, late 80s, early 90s, of like the Saturday morning cartoons,
Right.
that were basically gigantic advertisements for toys. So it was just like all of this inspiration. I mean, like, and one day I remember I started to go, when I got old enough, I started to collect my own comic books, and that was the heyday of Image Comics, and Jim Lee, Eric Larson, Willis Portacio, Todd McFarlane. I mean, like all these, like this was their heyday. And so that's when I was going to comic books shops. And I remember one day we were going to this different shop that we were we figured like 3 shops, and one of them was this place called the Hall of Justice, and they had a bunch of toys, and I always loved going in there. And
what a great name for
I know, right? I mean, I'm sure I'm sure they got permission from DC, right? Of course, right? I mean, they had a huge mural that was painted outside too, of all like the licensed characters. It was great, and so we went, and I was so excited to go because they had comics, but they had really cool toys as well. And so I remember going in, my mom parked a car, and we were walking in, and there was a line out the door. And it was popular, of course, on Saturdays, and there was usually a bunch of people there, but like for a line to be out the door was unusual. So we went in because somebody had asked us when we went up. He says, "Are you here for the signing?" And my mom was like, "No, we just want to go in." And I didn't know what was going on. And so when we went inside, I saw there was a line all the way to this person that was at a table signing comic books. And the owner had said, "Oh, we have such and such an artist," and for the life of me, I cannot remember the artist, but they had said, we're offering all these deals. If you buy a comic book, he'll sign up for you for X, Y, and Z, this amount of money and stuff. And it was the first time I realized, like, oh my goodness, that there was a person that actually made that comic.
Yeah, there was somebody, an individual behind it, and
yeah, and people
great.
were paying money just for their signatures.
There was a line out the door.
It was a line out the door, and I was like, "This is a career. Like, this is what people do for a living." And I had always loved drawing. I was never like the the quintessential like artists, like you hear so many times like, oh, I was the best in my class, I was the artist of my class, and people, the teachers loved me, I won all the art award. There was always someone better than me. I was always like either second place or third. um so but I love drawing all the time. And so at that point, when I saw that, I was like, I want to be a comic book artist, that's what I want to do. And so um and then from there I uh realized that art was a career. And then I think like shortly after that, my mom said, "Do you want to go see a movie?" And that movie ended up being Toy Story. And
Uh,
from there on out, I was just like blown away. I was like, "What is this? This is like the Saturday morning cartoons, but like, on steroids."
well, it
So
amazes me how many of our how much of our fandom and how similar the stories are. When you talk to Gary Kelly, you talk to Francis Livingston, you would never guess this is somebody that grew up on comics, and they're
yeah,
huge comic fans, and it's what got them interested. It's the thing that kicked the door open for them. They're like, hey, I see this. It's something that's being produced that I can get frequently, and it's so many illustrators that started because of that.
it's so and it's incredible how many generations of illustrators got inspired by that. I mean, just to think like they're a few generations removed from me, and we're looking at the same exact medium. I find that like mind blowing, because it was a completely different generation of artists.
Right.
I mean, were they in like the what was Gary looking at? Like he was like the '60s type of stuff,
Right. Yeah,
like
you would have to be. And
okay,
again, I am not a comic historian, or was never even a comic fan when I was a kid. I mean,
yeah,
the first thing that even close to it that I started looking at was Mad Magazine, and but I never really followed comics.
yeah,
My good friend George Pratt, he's the one who introduced me to most of the comic artists I know. And I
yeah,
started seeing the crossover, somebody like Sienkiewicz that, was doing mainstream illustration at the same time.
right,
But I just, I've learned a lot from George. I've learned a lot just from, paying attention and listening to what others have been up to. And there are some really phenomenal artists, unbelievable drawers
yeah.
that come from that world.
And just like so figure centric, like when I learned about, in high school, we didn't really have much of an art program until the senior year. And it was like, I was my high school classes were taught by like a, a professor, a retired uh, uh, teacher. Basically was a retired brother, and he had because I went to a all boys Catholic school, and so he would he was great at drawing, but he would draw something up. Our assignments where he'd draw something up, he'd pin it up on the board, and we were supposed to copy it, and that was it. And then on Fridays we watched The Simpsons, and so uh the only book that I had, I remember I was drawing a ton. And it was just trying to copy comics and things like that. And I remember a family member of mine's worked at the New York Public Library and said, "Oh, there's a book about how to draw comics, and I don't know, it's by." I said, "Is it by Stan Lee?" I didn't know, and he was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, it's by Stan Lee." And he was like, "I could take it out of the library if you'd want." I said, "Oh my God, yeah." And it happened to be How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. Isn't
That's
that wild? And so
that's great.
like that's where I learned, like I knew about John, but that's how I found out about John Buscema. But like, when I was learning about Michelangelo or like Leonardo da Vinci, when you hear those names, those are like the direct connecting points for me, because I was like, they're strong at the figure, so are the comic book artists.
Yeah.
I mean, meanwhile, I was completely like, I wasn't oblivious, but uh I didn't realize like all the history of American illustration that was like just happening, unbeknownst to me, it
Well,
was there in the periphery when you think about it, but
again, one of the things that I love having conversations with you, and I feel um, not completely prepared to, because you're such a historian. You again, I always joke about, I think we have a lot of the same books. The difference is you've read them and I've just looked at the pictures.
yeah.
All the facts and details. Uh,
Yeah.
you're very, very much like George that way. He's always telling me about the artist, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like I know what they do, but I just I don't know that much personally about them. It's just never been. That's just me. I just look at the
Yeah.
picture.
I mean, I think it stems to the fact that I'm the only artist in my family. I mean, I had my dad's cousin was a painter. Um, I had a distant cousin that is also an artist, but like nothing really, really direct. Like to say like they're an artist. This is what they do. Um, so I always felt it wasn't like I wasn't not encouraged, but my parents, and I get it, were very cautious, at first, like, oh, do you really want to do this? I mean, like, you gotta always have a backup plan. So I always felt the need, like I had to validate it for myself that this was a viable means of like direction that I could take my life. So I think that stemmed from that, and like the fact that I didn't have the information, as readily available, like even in undergrad, it really was that was like the end of my junior year, beginning of my senior year when I found out about all these illustrators. And I'm thinking like, how is this art happening? And I didn't know. And how do you do it? Because there's just no no information, and it's so I think that's where I like my obsessiveness came to like just rewatching documentaries or flipping through like, every single little uh um page
You,
that I could find of books.
I think it was in our open drawing night that you were talking about um, going to visit Charles Reed, and
Oh, Walt Reed, yeah.
excuse me, Charles. Yeah, Walt Reed. Charles
Yeah,
Reed's the
yeah.
watercolorist.
Yeah. Good,
Walt
good.
Reed,
Love Charles Reed's work
I do
too, man.
too.
His
I
those
think
books are
he's
awesome.
yeah, yeah. I think he's one of the best.
Yeah. But
Absolutely.
for those of you wondering, it's Charles Reed, Reid, and we're talking about Walt, which is short for Walter,
Yeah,
Reed, Reed. So I just thought I'd save you headaches in Google search.
like John Coffey. Sounds the same, but
Yeah.
a little different.
Right. Right. Right.
So, um, you just told us, Meg. I don't want you to go through the story, but it was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
while you were telling it, I was just thinking it takes a certain individual to go through that, to do that. I mean, you know what? I guarantee you, Walt recognized it, and he knows every once in a while somebody comes through that door that has that kind of interest, that's that
Yeah.
myopic and that focused, to want, because I think part of it was you had read a passage out of a book that he was shocked that you knew about.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, and he
how the
and that
conversations.
yeah, it was a Dean Cornwell book, and he had read the book, and I was telling him stories from the book that he had read, that he had written.
Written.
He's like, yeah, I know, I was there. I wrote the book. It was like midway through, I realized it. And he humored me.
So that's so great.
But yeah,
Well, hey,
yeah,
let's. I think we started talking about influences, and I think you got a few to share.
sure, yeah, I do, yeah. So so these are my like John had said, the uh my career is basically broken down into two parts: illustration, which is, I do a lot of did editorial illustration, advertising illustration, gaming illustration, and gallery painting, where I paint personal work, uh, different subject matter, that we can get into, but that hangs in galleries. And I've done private commissions and things like that. So, yes, influences. Um, a couple of ones that I wanted to talk about, and I'll kind of like skim through them, I guess, and then we could just pick and choose. Like, we'll dabble back and forth, I guess, if we want, if that sounds cool to you, John. Um,
Yeah,
so, uh, so the first one is the brothers Hildebrandt, and I want to talk about them because it actually connects to what we were talking about before. Second is Dean Cornwell, uh, Harvey Dunn, um, Haddon Sunbloom. Let's see if this other one will load here. Oop. Did I do this wrong? Yes, Diego Velasquez. Let's see. And after that is Charles Hawthorne, Robert Weaver, Thomas Blackshear, and then I had another slide. I don't know where it went, but I had your dad before actually Weaver, after Weaver and before Blackshear. And then we'll talk about my teachers and whatnot. But so I wanted to talk about the brothers Hildebrandt because I was made known to, like I was told about their work, after the fact. Like I had taken a in the summer, I'd taken this this class in well, long story short, in my junior year, I'd asked my teacher, I want to be a professional artist. What do I need to do to improve? And his answer was, I would work on your drawing, painting, and composition skills because that's where your weak is at. And I'm going in my head, drawing, painting, composition. That's everything, right?
That's what I was going to mention that.
So he said, "What do you?"
What else is there?
He says, "Do you want to do this for a living?" I says, "Yes." And he says, "I would stay an extra semester, an extra year, if you're thinking about ever getting into grad school." And that was something I was told at the end of my junior year, and I was crushed. And so I was like, that will never happen to me again. Like, I don't want to ever know where or just be completely oblivious to where I stand in terms of like my professional quality of my work. So my parents were gracious enough to pay for summer courses at Pratt and School of Visual Arts, and one of them was a drawing for animators course at Pratt. Was the first one. It was taught by an artist by the name of Greg Webb, and he was an old school animator, incredible at figure drawing. And he brought up just copying comic books, copying all this stuff. And he brought in cards, and they were the brothers Hildebrandt cards.
Oh, really?
He says, "Oh, I know them, and I would assist them with their photo shoots and stuff." And like, and I'm thinking, I have all of these cards somewhere. And I remember digging through, and I found their Marvel Masterpieces set. It was basically a painted card set that they did for Marvel in the 90s. And if they were just beautifully painted pieces with like this type of light, like, and I just loved them. I would carry them around all the time with me. So it's, that's kind of like that bridge, how we went from like comics to then like things that were painted, in illustration. It was always like weird bridge. And then I found out after the fact that I had, cards from like Boris Vallejo, Bill Sienkiewicz. I probably have a card that George did, if he did cards, because they did like another round where they just mixed up a bunch of things like Joe Jusko and Julie Bell, just the list goes on and on and on. So yeah, so I love the brothers Hildebrandt. Tim passed away, I think it's been a while. You ever met him, John?
Have not.
So Greg Hildebrandt is, I think he's 80, 84 now, I think, going on 16. And the man's got more energy than I mean, like, than most people I know. I mean, it's just a consummate, just always doing work, always painting, always excited about art, just like a real lover of art. And got into art for kind of the same reasons, animation and comic books. But again, like a generation, like a bunch of generations before that, you know, and I always found that like super interesting. But yeah, so they, you know, you realize like all these artists aren't created in a vacuum. That, like, you talk to Greg and he's just, you know, I've only met him in comic book conventions and stuff. And so, but the nicest person in the world, which is amazing because it's like he's one of my heroes. And just so knowledgeable about like art and all sorts of art, film and music and all that stuff. And but illustration, he just absolutely, it just, you know, loves talking about it. And I think that that's a testament to kind of like it shows in his work that he was looking that much
Right.
at things and figuring things out. Because I could only imagine how hard it was to get decent information, you know, even at that time, you know, in terms of like figurative painting. Yeah, so I think, you know, I think having an understanding, you know, I was told to me, don't just look at, if you look at an artist, look at who they looked at and looked at, you know, look at their teachers, look at, you know, who was influenced by those people, and just go back and back and back and back and see if you find like the thing that you really love about their work. You might actually like their influences better, or, you know, or you might find more things that you can gain from yourself, you know. And
Yeah,
yeah, and so
there's kind of a you talked about a time period of people, you know, somebody who's 85 years old now. You think back, and well, when they were learning, you know, that was 65, 70 years ago, and what was available. You could go to the Art Students League. You could go to places that taught. I mean, there really was. It was very divided. You could go to places that taught academic drawing and painting, but illustration, like they're really, I guess, before the first school that really dug into it was Art Center College of Design.
right.
And but even before that, I guess the first thing, or maybe about that same time, was the famous artist course, the course that all those contemporary artists contributed to, which was something you mailed in your assignments. Yeah. It was a correspondence course. And but that information is still absolutely stellar. If you can get back, I look at it every once in a while. If you can get by stylistic things that were from an era, the picture making principles and things that they taught in those courses are really amazing.
Oh man, you like those outdoor drawings?
Oh,
they're just
yeah.
like, I mean, like, what? It's just like you're looking at them and he's talking about like staging and fabric folds, and I'm just thinking like, how did you put something like this together? Like, the facility is just incredible. And I think, to the testament, I think the famous artist course also was open to having artists from all sorts of backgrounds, because like Dorn wasn't like Robert Fawcett,
No.
you know, and Fawcett wasn't like Rockwell, and none of them were
Austin
like
Briggs.
Austin Briggs, right?
Very different.
I've just really, I know, I would assume that it was like, because I think Albert Dorn is the one who started it, right?
He did organize it. In fact, I somewhere I read this or heard this. Somebody told me this. I don't know where it came from, but they said the most difficult thing about the school in general, and he said it's the most difficult thing he ever dealt with in his life is, and it wasn't dealing with all these, because those guys were all superstars. I mean,
right.
At a time when illustration was cherished, and he said the most difficult thing was getting them to front the $1,000 to start the school. Each had to put $1,000
Wow.
Which wasn't, you think about it being a lot of money at that time period during the 40s, but think of what some of the incomes those guys were making during the mid 40s.
Yeah,
They were
yeah,
all wealthy guys.
yeah.
But he
Doesn't
said,
Rockwell get I read somewhere that he had gotten the equivalent, like paid per Saturday Evening Post cover was the equivalent of the median price of a house in the country at the time.
probably, and he deserved it.
He
Um,
deserves it. Yeah,
that's what
absolutely. Yeah,
he did it better than anybody. He deserved it.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
absolutely, absolutely.
It's so funny that the likes of the group of artists from my father. I would listen to them talk about their people they looked at, people they learned from, and heroes, and they said if anybody that looked at like in illustration at in totality, all the great people that worked, they said you gotta walk away and just say Norman was just the best illustrator that ever lived. They said
Yeah,
it just was just absolutely amazing. And I thought that was funny for my dad to say that, because he was kind of going the opposite direction. He wanted to get away
right.
from that, but he still recognized his talent, how great he was.
It's so interesting to know his background too. Like he was just he grew up poor they lived in like a boarding home, right? In New York, him and his family, and like he swept the floors to pay his way through like the Art Students League. And the fact that he had like, people like, you know, was he studied under George Bridgman and Frank Riley?
Yeah, in
Um,
fact, I went to the museum, the Norman Rockwell Museum, and very graciously, Stephanie Plunkett was sharing a bunch of his work, had a bunch of his drawings as a student out, and they
Whoa.
were all Bridgman drawings,
Wow.
Bridgman lessons. They were beautifully done, but it was so cool to see that. I mean, it was just
Wow.
really interesting to see it.
Yeah. To think of somebody who just wanted it, it was just pure will, man, I remember reading a passage in his book about how people would say like, "Oh, if I worked as hard as you, Norman, I'd be a painter as great as Velasquez." And he would get really irked by that. He was like, "Well, why don't you?" And so, just like a consummate, it's just like an artist. I really,
Right.
really put him in that regard. I think like him, like Cornwell, I view the same way, and he must have been viewed the same way, just based off of the way like Walt Reed would talk about him and the way other people would talk about him. It was like he did it in a way that people aspired to do it in, and I think that's
Well,
I
he was very appreciative of other artists, and he was, as my dad put it, he was very friendly to emerging artists, very helpful. My
did
dad,
did he you talking about Cornwell?
no, I was talking about Rockwell.
Oh, Rockwell, yeah. So he had met. I'm assuming he met Norman Rockwell.
Yeah,
Bunch of times.
he actually had a really told me a very fun story about driving up to Massachusetts to Stockbridge when he actually had a studio on Main
On the
Street.
museum property.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, we're before they moved it.
Right.
And going there with I think Bernie and Fred Otness they all went together and went to visit him, and said they spent the afternoon with him. He said he was just so so open and loved talking to him. Said they really had a
Can
great time.
can you imagine?
Yeah,
Wow. Bunch of those guys like smushed in the car and
yeah.
it's just like wow. I mean, to be in that fly in that wall, right? In that room,
Right.
just to think about all the illustration history. But yeah, I mean, I think like uh I just love that stuff because you can every generation has their unique identity and like your dad's era from Rockwell's era, from Leindecker's era,
Right.
from Howard Pyle's era, and they're all borrowing from each other and influenced by, but they're all coming up with their own unique way of doing things. And I've always loved going back and you know uh, having the luxury of having all their images up on my computer screen while I work. Like I think back I always think about that, saying like, this wasn't even possible, you know, or very difficult, to do. And like, think about how all the access that I have, that people have to all
Oh,
sorts
I
of
know.
people.
It's so much, I've had this conversation with a number of contemporaries that I've taught with for a long time. It's like the opportunity to teach right now, just because access of being online with people. I mean, what we do educationally, it's so much easier because
Yeah.
you can pull up an artist, you can be, communicate with them all week long. And when we did the academy on ground, which someday maybe we will again, but when we were doing it right before COVID, I mean, you were in the room with these people for a long period of time,
Right.
but it was a very short period of time. I mean, a long period, like days and days for maybe a few weeks. But then, even if you came back the next summer, you didn't see them for 11 months. So
Right.
it was like there was this void that went in between. And now there's this connection, and everybody can be connected. And I think that's very, very helpful. Hey, we've only looked at, like, I want you to keep going through your
Oh yeah, sure.
this will happen again and again, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll keep I'll keep flinging through these things here. While the next one loads here, I just love Head and Sunbloom. It's like a painter that I wish I could pull off half the things he did. I always love that Chicago school of illustration, like Loomis, Sunbloom, his whole studio with like Harry Anderson and um so on and so forth. Yeah, Robert Weaver is another one. Like, yeah, a lot of people look at that as a man. Weaver out of that group doesn't make much sense, but I think he makes a ton of sense because he's very much like a reportage type of illustrator, very like about observational drawing and also impressionistic, and is very painterly with his finishes, and very subtle, way of image making too. It's direct observation, but there's also like a concept behind it. Um, I always appreciated that, with this work.
Well, I'm sure that, spending time with Marshall or spending time with Marshall's book and Steve Heller's book and using that while you were in school, that's the visual journalist. And
Right.
there is the I think the kingpin of it right there.
Right.
He changed it for everybody.
Yeah.
Influence he had on so many of the people that we're talking about, the influence he had on Fuchs and my father, even if you couldn't tell in the visual design, mark making or anything, but the point of view of their work changed drastically, or it made it possible for them to do what they did. He was the one that opened the door to that.
Yeah. It's amazing how illustration became about like being the observer rather than almost like you're creating this fantasy,
Right.
And so, yeah, like he took the camera off the tripod essentially, so yeah, so really, really great stuff. The next ones I want to go to, let's see if this will load here. It must be
I'm going to ask a question before
yeah.
we get too far behind. Hey, Ray, I have a question. Have you ever felt like you needed to produce a type of art in relation to your background as a Hispanic/Latino artist? I ask this since I'm Latino, and it's something I've asked myself a lot, and I've continued to expand my artwork.
Yeah, I think that I think the yes. The short answer, yes. And I think it was more not any external forces are the ones that forced me to do it. It was just more so that you know, I came from a very proud and just a really loving Puerto Rican family who was very connected to their culture. and it was important that you knew about the history of your culture. And you know, as an artist, I never wanted to feel like I was ignoring them, or doing a disservice to that because of the people that came, the sacrifices that were made in order to get me where I'm at today. And so, um, yeah, I think there was some sort of a like an external, I don't know if it's an external pressure, but it was something that I felt like, oh, I should be doing this, or I should be identified as that. I should bring my culture in, to show that, to bring it, to the in front of the masses in a sense. But um I think it was talking to Alberto Ray, who did this painting right here, uh where he had told me, basically just be you, like you're, all cultures, because he was Cuban. He is Cuban. He's not was, but he had, he says, we're all a multitude of cultures, and so just let your influences bring all of that stuff in, because that's going to come into your work anyway, uh as long as you're sensitive to that. And so, after that, I never really felt the need to um uh corner myself as, or identify myself as a, a Latino artist, or Latinx or whatever, and or Puerto Rican painter, because it wasn't really like natural to me. um I just painted what I knew, and I thought that that was going to be. I just wanted to be genuine, and authentic to myself. So, hope that that answers the question. It
Well,
helps.
that's a great line. Of just, you painted what you knew, and I think that I think that's what most artists do. I don't know if you were there one night in the drawing open drawing night. We asked, I kind of asked everybody in the room, who would you like to have a conversation with, of artists, living or past? And we did living first, and then we went to past. And somebody said, uh, Andrew Wyatt was high on the list. And
Yeah,
Chris Payne's like, I love his work, but I don't know if I really want to have a conversation with him. It's like, it's so focused just on him being on that farm. It's like, that was his world. He knew it really
yeah,
well.
yeah,
He said, but I
yeah,
don't know if that's the guy I want to have a conversation. I just thought that was such a funny
yeah,
observation.
yeah. I remember when Chris had said that. Yeah, I was in the room. Yeah, yeah. It's just like like just completely humanized it, just the
Yeah.
way. And have, somebody like, most of those people in the room are the people that I would love to talk to, and I am talking to them. So it's like, you know, I'm just having a ball. I think I had selected Thomas Blackshear, and I think you had said, well, that could actually happen, right?
Yeah, that's right. There's his number.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not gonna be
it's
that
his
hard.
number. Right, right. So I mean, yeah, it's so interesting to, yeah, I could totally see that. I could
But
definitely
but
totally
that's an
see that.
interesting thing to think about, to try
Yeah,
to imagine someone's personality,
yeah,
about from their work. And it's, with illustration, it's a little trickier, because you're doing client work, and it's not there's somebody in between the work that you're making, between you and it. Again, you can have great voice as an illustrator, and the most successful do, but it's somebody else's project that you're working on. It's like, you didn't always choose to do that project. With painting,
yeah,
you're dragging it, and so I think you can see the person easier. uh,
yeah. And I think also like the I mean, I think that's why I gravitate to illustrators from that, like that golden age era. I mean, depending on what you call the golden age, because I even call your dad's era the golden age, and actually, every era kind of has a golden age. But,
right.
um, you know, Cornwell and Dunn, like Dunn came from, a a position of like Howard Pyle was trying to create the true American art form.
Right.
He wasn't. He just used the magazines as a vehicle to do it, because there were no galleries and museums, run amok across the United States, but there was mail, and so they always viewed things through the lens of like an artist, um, and I think that having like there's a passage I always read if I could find it about Saul Tepper. Do you know the story about Saul Tepper and Harvey Dunn, about how like Saul Tepper came to Harvey Dunn and was he visited him in his studio, and he was just stressed out because the things that were being made at the time, things like the Wild West, or like swashbuckling, the pirates, and all these things that his classmates were doing, his peers were doing, and um, he really didn't have much of a connection to. And really, all he wanted to do was paint what he knew, which was the city, like more urban life, and he wanted to center around that. But he felt pressured to do this other thing, and it was really eating at him. And basically, the story goes like they talked and talked so much so that so late in the day that the sun had gone down, and the only light was the light of like Harvey Dunn's cigarette. It's just the only thing that was glowing. And he put down the cigarette, and he was like, basically like, Tep, I think that sounds like a great idea. Just go do that. Just like kind of paint what you know and who you are. I think is an important thing. I think your dad, Bernie Fuchs. I mean, that whole generation did that, though. I mean, like,
Absolutely. I mean, if you knew those people, I mean, you go back and pick up a book on my father, or look at especially the last 5 years of what he did. He kind of reverted to his what he was looking at as a child. I mean, he reverted to even, I mean, his lens changed of the type of work he was doing. It simplified. It got a little bit more primitive. He didn't show off the skill he had as much, but he would paint the things that he only painted what he wanted to. He did that the last 20 years of his life, but it was chickens and horses and cows and landscapes. That's what he grew up in this little country town, and that's what he knew. And that's what he kind of reverted back to that subject matter, as something that he really knew well and liked.
Well, I think those paintings that he did were so, it's just like they're so direct and simple, but so well done. It's like, it's just so you could see the generations of experience and skill that goes into them. That, like, it reminds me of like Harvey Dunn's prairie paintings. Like, these things are painted with, like, it looks like he was shoveling paint on the canvas, right? And they're just bold and direct, and like you were saying, he didn't feel the need to show off his skill. He was just getting at the subject, the way he wanted to. And it's always interesting to see painters do that. Not all of them do, but it's always really interesting to see
it's kind of
that evolution.
It was just kind of just extremely high level skill of design and mark making, and that's what he was most interested in at the time. But really pushing color. I mean, you try to explain scientifically his color palette, just forget it. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. But it worked beautifully.
But
it was all intuition. It was all totally intuitive, what he was doing at the end of his life, and it was so much fun to see. And I close enough where I got to see enough into what Heindel was doing, and that was very, very similar chase too. And it was like, how far can I push this? How far can I, make this, let me be happy with what I'm doing? And there's many artists over history that have done it. And I just think it's great when someone can be on the earth long enough to explore all that.
And be able to not be because there's a certain, I mean, there's a lot of risk doing that too, where you go that far out, and people might not follow.
Well,
And
I think my dad looked at it when he was really pushing it. He was, getting close to 80 years old. I don't think he looked at it with much risk. He was
right,
like,
right, yeah,
I'm just going to make myself happy. And,
yeah,
and he kind of approached probably pretty much the last 20 years of his life doing that. He says, I've been making everybody else's pictures for a long period of time. I just want to focus on doing what I want to do. And he said something to me one day, which I really kind of took me back. He said, I want to see how good I can be at this.
man,
And I have so many limitations in what I've been doing most of my career that I can't go very far out of bounds because I'm, doing this for client work. But I want to see how good I can be as, just making the work that I want to make.
right,
He
right,
took it very, very seriously.
yeah, yeah,
You talk about, you've seen mature artists that we've known. You talk about Hildebrand or
hmm,
people that have been working a long time. Those people in their 80s get up and work 6 and 8 hours a day.
absolutely, yeah,
And
yeah,
it's just because they're possessed. I mean, I think
yeah, yeah,
they did, that's my father kept referring to it. It's the only thing that really makes me happy.
yeah, yeah. I think that's I mean, people that remind me of that, are all. I think I've gravitated a lot towards teachers like that. I think like Alberto Ray is very much like that. Um, like Craig Nelson is
He
another
was going to be the
person.
first person I said. I can't. That has got to be the most productive individual on the planet. I cannot believe the amount of the body of work that guy produces.
He,
Good work.
and yeah, and to think that like he decided, and he's still doing it, by the way. Once the pandemic hit, every Friday he did a 3-hour demo for people on Facebook. He's still doing it. You can
Really.
get it on YouTube as well. Yeah. And he does, like, he challenges himself. He does these 3-hour paintings. You'll lay in a 24 by 30 or 30 by 40, or like these are not like, here I am, and like it's like, hey Ray, can you do something in 3 hours? I'm like, okay, how small can I get away with, right? And he's just going big, and and to see him just working like that all the time, while working on, he's done tons and tons of shows since that.
For
It's
those
pretty
of you that
amazing.
maybe didn't hear the name, it's Craig Nelson,
Craig
and
Nelson, yeah.
just you were fortunate. I assume you had him as an instructor.
I did, yeah. He was in the undergrad fine arts. He was the head of the undergrad fine arts department at the time, but he taught. So he taught some painting courses that the grad students could take. He taught a couple of grad classes, and he taught this one illustration course called narrative painting. And I was told by Chris Ron, who, uh, of course, that was like the best illustration course to take. That was like the one. And I remember,
He did a lot of really good illustration along the way too.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's how I'm aware of him, is what he was
right.
doing, what I would see in the annuals and things.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
And he
so
bring in that work. So it was awesome, and like him, my teacher Bill Mon was another, who's the direct line to your dad, and basically kind of the illustrators workshop / illustration academy kind of sphere, uh hugely influenced, very much like that same type of, always working, always doing things. And John Rush, whom, I think, I think about all these artists. Oh, lastly, David Grove as well.
so
They're
did you have Grove as an instructor ever?
So I saw David's work in Spectrum one year, and because I was looking up illustrators who were in the San Francisco area to call up, right? And there was one was Owen Smith, in the Spectrum. Another one was Robert Hunt, uh, Eric Joyner, and then there was this painterly piece of like nights riding into this through a sunset. It was like backlit, and I was like, that is what I'm talking about. That's like fuchs with like this impressionistic color that's painted on top. Yeah, I mean, like, who's this young kid doing this? Because I'm thinking Spectrum Annual.
Got to be a kid,
This
right?
is it. Yeah, it's got to be a guy. So I call him up and I asked if he could come over to the studio. And so then I actually look them up because they, on the back of the annuals, I don't think they still have this, but they had, their number and address. And so I, did an internet search before I went over and realized like he had just came back from being inducted into the Hall of Fame of Illustration. And I'm like, what? And so I had asked David if he wanted to do an independent study with me. And he told me, he said no, but I could come by once a month and show him a bunch of paintings, which essentially was like, I want to do an independent study. You could do an independent study with me, but I don't want you to, I don't want to get paid for it or anything like that,
But
And
I don't want you
so,
to be here very much.
right, yeah. And so but we talk for hours, like I'd bring over these paintings and we talk in his studio, in his home. And we, I was surrounded by just beautiful artwork. I mean,
You're fortunate. He's a good artist.
yeah. And he collected other people's artwork as well, and I thought that was like, he had some old Cooper Studios stuff. He just had all these things, and he was like a real, I mean, like he really cared about the craft, like really cared about the craft, and talked about what he used for references, and he, how he put things together, who his influences were. Like he introduced me to Ludwig Holbein. Um,
Oh wow.
I had I don't know if I told this story but before, but he, in his bios and everything like that, they were everything was saying like he was influenced by Cole Phillips, like his variation of the Fadeaway Girl. And I knew Cole Phillips. And so I was like, hey, let me bring that up in conversation and let him know that I love illustration as well. And like, I'm aware of this stuff. And so I kept bringing up Cole Phillips, and he was just like, kind of like indifferent to what I was saying. And as he like, this was our first visit. And so as he, I'm pointing out artwork. I says, "Oh, you won it for this. You won the Society of Illustrators gold medal for this from Los Angeles, right?" He was like, "How'd you know that?" And I was like, "Oh, it was on the internet. Like, oh, this was for National Geographic, right?" He's like, "Did you have the, how'd you know that? That was done like 30 years ago, like." And I said, I looked it up on the internet and stuff, and like so he warmed up and he said, I got to tell you, I got to ask you, like, and of course I'm cleaning up the language because David was very famous for his expletives, but he did it in such an artful way. It was, incredible. So, but he had said, "Who's Cole Phillips?" I sat there I was like, I'm getting inducted to the Hall of Fame of Illustration. This is a true story, by the way. I am not making this up. And I told him afterwards. Well, so I said, he goes, I'm listening to people saying such wonderful things. Murray Tinkelman is reading this thing, this wonderful piece about me, and he's bringing up Cole Phillips, and everybody says Cole Phillips and this, and I'm just seeing all this in all the writings, and I'm like, and I have no idea who Cole Phillips is. And I said, well, he said, so who is he? Tell me. And I'm like, no one's ever going to believe me that I introduced Cole Phillips to you. Did you realize this, David? Right? And he's like laughing. And so I said, well, David, he did this thing called the Fadeaway Girl. And he's like, yeah, I know. That's what I read. Well, what is it? So I show him Cole Phillips, and he's like, I was like, I wasn't looking at any of that. It's like, I said, well, who are you looking at? He says, Ludwig Holbein. This is German poster designer. Yeah. And he showed me a book that he got from Europe, and we're flipping through it, and you could see it. He's like, yep, he lived in Europe, and so he got it right there. Yep. And that was like, and that, of course, a Bernie and your dad, and between him and like John, especially John Rush,
did you
they were never happy with their work. They were always like, but they were always excited when they would do something that really excited them. like David Grove. I just want to say this one thing about David. He showed me this Pirate Freedom. It was he started at the time he started working again for Irene Gallo, and he had this cover of Pirate Freedom. It was this like beautiful color of this painting of a pirate at night, underlit with this warm light. It was beautiful, and he was talking about how excited he was about the color of the highlight on the ship's steering wheel. And he's like, I just nailed it. It's like I was so happy with that thing, like right there. And I just put it down and I didn't have to fuss with it. It was like, oh, it's like I could just live forever in those moments. And I'm thinking, like, here's a man who's been doing this for decades, and he's like that excited about this thing. It was really just I took a lot of note from that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that was fun. I was just I love listening to the story. Gary Amano, who's from that part of the world, and
Gary,
the Gary said he loves the Grove story. It's hilarious. I was going to ask, did you have Kazu Sanos? Did you have opportunity to spend any time there? Or
so I was very, very much aware of Kazuhiko Sano, and I never got a chance to study with his in a class of his because they were always full. And but I met him a handful of times, and I was thankful enough that I got to tell him how much I appreciated his work. And for those of you who don't know who Kazu Sano was he was known for a lot of things, but he did the Return of the Jedi poster for Star Wars. Is the easiest thing to come up with, but he did things for everything. I mean, and he told me one time, it was I met him in my thesis, my midpoint review in my graduate studies. And so basically with the midpoint, they check the skill building classes that you've done previously and the work that you're doing. You pitch your thesis, and if it's either like they do thumbs up or thumbs down if you can progress forward to the second half of your studies. And the whole goal is basically to prevent you from not being ready to do the thing that you want to do, basically. And so I remember I was getting ready to do this, and I could show a couple of it, a visual essay of my family in Puerto Rico, documenting them after the death of my grandfather. And I was telling this story, and I had a couple of test paintings that I had done. And I remember Kazu telling me, is like, I want you to paint the smell of the place. Don't just paint the thing as it looks. I want you to paint the smell of the place. And I was like, that always stuck with me. And then at the end, when in my final review, when I presented it, he sat back, he like folded his arms and sat back. He says, your paintings make me want to tell stories of my own and share them with others. And I thought that was the greatest compliment I've ever gotten in my entire life, So, but
you did that right before he gave you the thumbs down?
Yeah. That being said, kid, back to the drawing board.
Back to the drawing board, kid.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, good stuff. But yeah, no, I didn't get a chance. I was bummed about that. But yeah, his students, just every single student of his was you would just talk so highly of him.
I always look at Sano and Grove from my perspective, from where I started working in the mid 80s. I looked at them as being like the ultimate West Coast illustrators.
Yeah.
There was a separation, and it kind of came together over time, but it used to be very different in the different look that's going on. There was so much editorial, so much, women magazine, and then a lot of the institutional stuff that was being done in New York, and then very different, the entertainment stuff that was being done on the West Coast. It was really separate.
Well, for those of you who don't know, David Grove was taught Kazu and was a mentor to Kazu Sano, and Robert Hunt, and Greg Manchus, by the way, as well, for those who don't know. So yeah, you could definitely see the influence too, and the approach to kind of crafting your image. I mean, he was, from what I was told, just a consummate craftsman. I mean, there was nothing done to half effort when it came to what Kazu did. Uh, you know, from what was told, about when I asked about how he worked and things like that.
I was fortunate to go to lunch with him a couple of times when visiting the Academy of Art, and just a very, very nice man.
Yeah. But so yeah, so between that and like John Rush, who really, I credit him with kind of like tying everything together, just on a pedagogical level. He really taught me the language of like this, just design basically, and understanding how to take all the things that I was learning and put them into impactful imagery. And he's another person who was just constantly pushing himself in his artwork, constantly. I was in his studio a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic. I visited him in Chicago, and he was telling me about, I think he was like, he had just turned 70, and he was talking about how he was working on a body of work, series of paintings on Homer's Odyssey, and he had worked about a year on all these paintings, and he was going to throw them all out. And I'm thinking to myself, he's 70 years old. This is a man who's done tons of work, accomplishments left and right, and he's still unhappy. Like he has no problem just saying, nope, I'm going to throw this stuff out. And nobody will ever see it.
Robert Hunt, we had as a guest speaker last year at the mentorship program, and I had never had a long conversation. I had been introduced to him once before, shook hands with him at the Society of Illustrators. That was it. And I had him come in and do a talk with us. So it was really refreshing. I didn't know a lot about him, just timelines and things like that. I've seen a ton of his work. And he talked a lot about many of the same people you're talking about, the influence they had on him. And he told a wonderful story about Robert Heindel coming to visit this school. And he was visiting a gallery at the same time in San Francisco, coming out from the East Coast. And so he was paying double duty there, speaking at the school and visiting galleries. And he had like a tube of canvases that he was going to show originals at the gallery. And he showed them to everybody. And they were very, it was before he started doing the dance. They were almost, they were almost X-rated. I don't know how else to say it. It was like soft porn in a way, or maybe even further. But it was two figures, and they were all pretty, beautifully painted, beautifully done.
Yeah, for sure.
And Hunt was just like, oh, they were so good, they were so unbelievable. And he said, I had a great conversation with him. I came back the next year, the exact same thing, visiting the same gallery, and he had a tube of paintings rolled up, and he unrolled all these paintings, and it was completely different subject matter, completely different direction. It was all the dance. And he said, what happened? What did you do? And he goes, oh, those weren't good enough. And he said, it destroyed me. He goes, I would have done anything to do as well as one of those paintings that he did before. And he said but those paintings weren't good enough. These were better. And I thought, wow, the way he delivered the story was fantastic. It was.
Is this just like imagining, just how beautiful those things probably were, and to think that. I always look at people who achieve that level of mastery, and like their throwaways, are like these incredible things. And to think that even that was expendable in their eyes, it's just great.
My father was really serious about that. He getting rid of work I mean, he said, he'd always say this. He goes, your trash can should be full all the time. You should be getting
Wow.
rid of your work. Or you should be doing enough that you're going to experiment and do things you don't like. And he was constantly pushing it with that. It got to the point that success, even here in Kansas City, said it first started happening. He became kind of a star in Detroit, and said that people used to come and take things out of his trash can on trash.
Oh my
on trash
God.
day. And so in Connecticut, there was no problem because we lived in such a rural area that nobody was ever going to be out there. In Kansas City, people would go through his trash. People would, they would try to grab artwork out of his trash. I just thought that was so incredibly
That is insane. Yeah, that's insane. That's insane. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Like, you think oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
I have to say I have and I never went through his trash out when it was taken to the curb, but I've grabbed a few things out of his trash can in the studio. It's like, you cannot throw this out.
Yeah. Well,
I want
like,
to take it because I don't want it.
that's,
Just don't show it to anybody.
yeah, I was like, I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm thinking, this is my train of thought, by the way. That is crazy. How insane are people? And I was like, well, you could have earned. I was like, I was like, think about the things that those people got. It's like that actually is a pretty good. I would have been one of those people.
Well,
I would have totally.
I won't tell the story, but there's a wonderful story that I originally saw on 60 Minutes or Sunday morning with Charles Carl, about a woman that had had in her possession a Jackson Pollock, but it wasn't signed, and she couldn't get the Pollock estate to sign off on it. And so they went to all of these authorities, these people, and everybody was like, yeah, that's a Pollock. And then finally they said, for God's sake, it's got a thumbprint and a hair. He said, and he had been arrested multiple times. He said, it's not going to be very far-fetched that you can prove this was his.
Right.
And they were estimating, and well, the reason I tell it is because she found it at the local dump. He got rid of it. And she found it at the dump, and the dump was using it as a sign. Painted on the back, it said, or actually, it was somebody else that showed one that was similar, that found it from the same dump and his version of it, and it was signed, and it was appraised at $33 million. This was 15 years ago. The story came out, but the on the back of this individual's Pollock, it said "dump 1 mile." Arrow. We had it stuck in the ground, and we're using it as a sign. $33 million painting.
Oh man.
Yeah. So yeah.
You had to think about that, right? Oh, too crazy. Yeah.
Well, let's see some. Let's. I know you had more things prepared, and we've been talking, and I love it. I just love having the conversation with you. But let's talk about some other things.
Okay.
I have a question for you. This is a question that means a lot to me. I'm a family man. I'm very, very much in love with my family, and you're kind of an age. I know you have a 2 or 3 year old.
2-year-old. Yeah,
in that range. Being an artist and living your life as an artist, and being responsible as a father and a husband and all of that. What has that done to you? What has it meant to you? What is it? Tell me about it a little bit.
Yeah, I think it has made it's a complete life changer. I mean, your world goes from your career being and your work being the primary driving force of your day to this other person, and your family, like a child and family, and maintaining that relationship becomes a priority. So like, I used to work 10, 12 hours a day. I mean, it wasn't an issue. That's what I want. I want to be in the studio all the time. And I was lucky enough to find someone, my wife's an art historian and has a background in painting and sculpture. So she knows, the amount of commitment it takes, and she was a good artist in school too, like that was the thing. Like, so she really understands commitment, and that time went from 10 to 12 down to 3 if I was lucky,
I don't
and
mean, I'm laughing at the number, not the fact that it did.
no, it's
Just how much
yeah,
time
no, it
you
is
do.
right. But it's something you laugh at because you've been through it. It's one of those things too.
Right.
Like, you understand. So it's really put a priority on uh being focused about what it is that you want to do, and uh doing the things to the absolute best of your ability, I think, is more important now than it's ever been in my entire life. Uh, I look at my paintings, and I think of them as like, I have to paint this as best that I can, um,
Did it
because
change? Did it change your schedule a lot? I mean, as far as time,
yeah, oh, everything,
day and when
everything.
you work.
Yeah, I used to work at night all the time, but now I work in the mornings, and like an hour here, hour there. Like, I'm trying to now, because with the kids, as you know, like, sleeping schedules change,
Right.
so you adapt with that. And um,
As your daughter gets older, you'll stay up later. I mean, you'll that will adjust too, because it happened to
yeah,
me.
really, yeah. So, well, yeah, because like now this is like, usually around my bedtime, which is hilarious, because this is the time I'd be going back to the studio for another round, like another 3 hour round or something, and I think it's really focused me on just like execution, and just getting things done to the best that I possibly can. And I can't think of it any other way than that, in the sense that it's I used to have, and as an artist, you always are fighting with a lot of like, should I be doing this, or should I be doing that? Am I happy? Uh, all of this, almost like, you really risk like, a paralyzation through overanalyzing things. But so every day that goes by, it's like, we don't have time to think, you have time to do, and that's it. You gotta be productive. And so you really hone in on like what's working about your work. And uh I guess it's really kind of taken my work has almost become more like just an extension of like my eyes, and I don't think as much anymore about things. I still do, like, I still wonder if I'm doing the right thing with my paintings, and pushing them, and making sure that I'm doing the things that are true to me, and also being, not fooling myself into thinking, doing something that's not to my absolute best, and not handicapping myself in that regard. Um, but it's more like, when I'm doing something, I'm just, I'm not thinking like, oh, should I integrate more Dean Cornwell, or should I do a wash like, David would do, or like John has this piece and Vouillard has this piece. I would love to do wouldn't it be interesting if I just did a painting like that, or like a Bonnard, mixed with like a Repin. Oh boy, that would be cool. And so, my mind kind of still does that. Like, I love experimenting, but when I'm sitting, I was in front of my easel today, and I had about an hour to paint today because of just other commitments I had. And I thought, like, I just got to paint. And I think that's where I'm at now, which is a weird place to be, I think, for me, because like I said before, everything I wasn't like uh, the artist in my school, or won any awards. So everything that I had wasn't natural, it was all hard fought. And so for the first time in my life, I'm really just working on the things that are just natural to me. And it's a
Has your
weird switch.
subject matter changed? Bill Cobb's asking that since you became a father, The focus of the subject matter?
I've done a lot more, I think, interiors and no, I don't think the subject matter has changed. The things that are in the subjects in the paintings have changed. And I was working on a still life today. Um, and I noticed like I look at it and it says, that's my life right now. Or like I did a still life recently of my fridge. And I if you look inside my fridge, it's like completely been reorganized to make it as efficient as possible to get breakfast in the morning for my kid and lunch and making sure the snacks are right there, and yogurt and cottage cheese and like, all these things. What happens if she's teething, that sort of thing. And like, um, you just don't, I always notice it after the fact. So I think that's, yeah, I think that's also something. But I've also thought to myself too, like I've got to make sure that what I'm doing is good, right for my family, but also true to me. 'Cause I took a lot of risk being an artist, and it's not something that I take lightly. I don't, I'm supporting myself doing it, and so, and especially now, I know I stopped. I was teaching part time at SUNY Fredonia for a while for 15 years, and so, and I left right when my kid was born to go paint full time, and make that the priority. And I want to make sure that like I did that because I wanted to things were going well in painting, and I needed to devote more time, but more also, I want to be able to look my kid in the face. It's important for me to look my kid in the eye when she's much older and say, I did this, and a lot of people weren't necessarily behind me or didn't think that I was uh, capable of doing this. And if you believe if this is something that your gut's telling you to do, then go do it. Even
I
if
think it's fascinating that you did kind of what the opposite of what most people do. Most people would take the teaching job when their child's born, or they'd be
right,
looking for the teaching job, something that's like secure. Um,
right,
I've always thought that security comes, it's like if you want to be more secure as an artist, you make more work. That's
yeah,
that's kind of how it was how it was put and delivered to me. It's like, okay, so you're not working on a job right now. Uh, you should be creating inventory. You should be. I mean, if that's that was the mindset that my father had, and then that I kind of picked up on, and it was what was expected. I love the fact that how serious you are about it.
yeah,
Not and how much you believe in yourself to do that,
yeah,
because you're doubling down and betting on yourself, to do that. And that's it. Again, I know it's going to be really scary to do it, but it does. Again, it's not right for everybody either. But and I see a lot of the people, a lot of the people I know that have come, have risen to the top. That was their attitude. There was no plan B. They just, I'm just going to do more of this and double down on this and make it work. Um,
yeah, yeah.
so
It's well, I mean, yeah, and I think just having yeah, it is like believing in yourself, and it's also just doing, you know, if I wanted to be unhappy, I would have done something else. I think that's the thing I think about too. It's like if I'm going to be unhappy, not being at my easel and doing doing things that take me away from that, um, then I might as well just leave art altogether
so
because I could make more money doing other things that make me unhappy.
right. Do you
I think
think that
that's
focusing on the painting career more had a lot to do with that? I mean that's from me looking in, that looks like what you're doing most of the time now. I could
Yeah.
be totally wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like there's a huge amount of focus going in that direction. I thought, because I experienced being an illustrator, being extremely busy when I had children until my oldest was in her teens. And then my career, I started making, well, early teens, I started making my living from a gallery, from selling gallery work. Time wise, I had more control of that. And it was easier for me to be with my children because I could do blocks of work, and I wouldn't be called away to like, oh, you got to do this tonight.
Right.
And I lived like that for 20 plus years. It's like being on call. I wouldn't change
Yeah.
it for anything because I had a blast doing it and it was so much benefit from it. But it can be really brutal.
Yeah. I think it wasn't, it was more of a, um, going with the hot hand in a sense, like the momentum. I had a much more, so I would work on illustrations, gallery paintings in between illustration jobs. And, you know, at that point, once the gallery stuff started taking hold, it was like, well, I have all this momentum going into this thing. Um, why not just do that? And that way I can just do the work that I want to do if people are buying it and people are interested in it. And that's kind of where I saw it, in a sense. And I've done illustrations here and there, from recently, and I love doing it. I think it's great. I always love doing illustration work, and being able to. It's great because it just is that part of the muscle that you know uh, that storytelling of maybe the subject matter. And like I just wrapped up work for that just got revealed for Wizards of the Coast, and that was like a blast to do. Uh, so it's more, I think it's more for me at this point in time of my career, and that might change. It's the gallery work that's producing the most amount of momentum. And I just got my third gallery, like about 2 years ago, 2 3, I think it's about 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It's going to be a third year. Um and so I felt that if I committed to other things like teaching, um I could, that opportunity would be jeopardized, because that would mean I would do less work, and that wasn't advantageous for that gallery to even have me on. So if I had this opportunity, I had to strike now, you know. And
We're going to come back around to that about you.
yeah,
That's going to be brought up again, but
right. Haven't fully stopped teaching yet. We're going to talk about that. Yeah.
But
Because I still like doing it for sure,
I'm
but
going to bring up one thing that I've noticed from
I'm gonna John, I'm gonna flip through some work. Just
yeah, please do. I'm
we're
gonna ask. I'm gonna talk about this, and you can respond to it when you're flipping through work here.
Yeah.
I think illustration as a training ground, as a picture maker, you can't beat it. You're forced to learn all these things and do all these things that you probably would never do on your own.
And and I was fortunate that my education from people like originally from Alberto Ray, who was a painter. He had like a brief background as an illustrator, but he illustrated his own articles that he would then like a Great Sporting Journal. I don't know if you ever heard of that, or like Fish and Fly magazine. Like he would write and illustrate his own things. And then he showed me people like Jack Unruh, or like and again, going back to like all those editorial illustrators, especially from the education of an illustrator. But then, so there was no divide between fine art and illustration when I was introduced to all of this stuff. I was shown that there was a divide, but it was never treated any differently in a holistic sense. Like it was all about generating your work from your interests, and the training was the same in a sense that like you were it was based off of like how to get the tools to best tell the story
Right.
in the most interesting manner. And then when I went into school grad school, and I met people like Craig Nelson and Beaumont, they were always dual career people. Bill would be working on, you know, a tea label for Good Earth Tea while working on a solo show for, for his gallery. And so, and Craig would do the same thing. He wrapped up. I remember he was showing us a Broadway poster that he wrapped up while also, working on a solo show. And he would bring in those things all the time. So we always had to be good at everything, and it was great because the way they presented it was us experimenting with different subject matter, and being versatile in it. Every one of them allowed you to experiment and do whatever you want, because the worst thing that could happen was if you spent 4 years just painting still life only to find out you don't really like still life. Right? I mean, that's horrible, right? And so we never had that problem. And the way Bill we used to always tell us is you want to have good tools, and you want to be able to, because those good tools in the form of skills allows you to be flexible and go to different things and to entertain yourself. Basically, it's entertain your wants. And so if you want to go in different directions, you can do that because you have the means of doing that. And I'm always grateful for that, because I realize more and more all the people that I look at, had those same exact skills, and so, like all of you guys at Illustration Academy all had that, have that, and Visual Arts Passage as well, and just think, I mean, because we were talking about how, like, you're working on a gallery show, and like, and then, but at the same time, you're drawing likenesses, and nailing them, and so, like, you could turn that on and off, and just to think, like, if you wanted to become a portrait artist tomorrow, you could, and there wouldn't be a this huge
Well,
hurdle. It would just
do
be a
me a
matter of,
favor.
like, interest.
If I do, shoot me.
Yeah, I know. Maybe I should have said portrait. I know a lot of portrait artists that,
Nothing against it. I mean, it's and
no,
more
yeah,
power to
yeah.
them, because it is some of the hardest thing.
I
I'm
Yes,
politically
yeah,
not good enough
yeah,
to do that.
yeah. It's a like, because I love painting the head,
I do too.
and the figure. I love painting the figure, and I love anatomy. I love drawing the figure. It's one of my absolute loves in the world. And it's funny because the stuff that I'm working on now is more still life stuff. And this is the early illustration stuff, and type of work that I would do, theater posters and things like that. But you could see, like, a lot of figurative stuff. This is my old science fiction fantasy stuff that I cut my teeth on. It's like my version of the pulps, I always say. Absolutely love it, but was pulled in this type of direction because I wanted to.
When did you start doing digital work, right?
So, it's funny. It was when I started working on theater posters. I realized I had because my first illustrations were in oils, and I was like, I'm an oil painter. That's what I'm doing. And I knew Photoshop, but I was like, I'm not going to digitally paint because I want a physical object. And then I realized I was working on this sketch, scanned it and sent it to the theater director, and the theater director was like, that's great, but can you turn all the figures, And I was like, what? And like, I'm gonna have to redraw the whole thing and destroy this piece that I absolutely love to fit the needs of the client. And this was early on in my career, and I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, Ray. That's when I really learned, like, they're paying you, so it's not about the piece. And then I thought to myself, I had this revelation, like, oh my God, it's never been about the piece. It's art for reproduction. So that's when I picked up, I had my good friend Tyler Jacobson show me his workflow, which was basically the same workflow we did. It's digital workflow, and was the same workflow we did in school, just in oils, It
Right.
was, and I said, perfect. And it took me a day to pick it up. and I was off to the races. Because I already knew how to paint and I knew Photoshop, so it wasn't really that hard. I
Well,
did a couple of studies.
you've embraced technologies. Just watch, just sitting in and listening on your head painting class,
Yeah.
and seeing how well you use, and how much you employ, even if you're doing a traditional piece, just to get to the finish, how much technology you use. And I think it's great. I mean, why not? Illustration's always chased technology.
Yeah.
It's always been a product of it. I remember, we could talk for a minute or two about what's coming down the road, technology wise, which you're much more equipped to do that than I am. But when I first started teaching, well, I'll say 5 years into me teaching, everybody was screaming that, what's the point? Digital photography and digital painting is going to take it all away. There's not going to be any illustrators anymore. More so, graphic designers or photographers. And it didn't work out that way.
Yeah.
And again, I know we're all, staring down the barrel right now with AI. And I think you have a very good understanding of it and a good take on it. My take's very similar to you. I just don't understand it as much. I listen to people that I think that know a lot more about it than I do.
Yeah, and I think also, like, I don't know. The way I view a lot of things like that sometimes is like with digital painting in particular. There were people that were very much against it. Because it was not real art and this and that, and there was a huge fight on things, and like, you're losing all the craft, and I just remember thinking like, and this is why, by the way, this is why as an artist you want to study history, art history, or just history in general is really important. But like, there are always people that are against like new technologies. I mean, like Michelangelo was famous for hating oil painting because he thought it was cheating, because you could actually correct things. So it's just like, well, where's the artistry in that? Where's the real artist painting fresco? I mean, then it's like, are you kidding me? That's like, are you a psychopath, right? And so like, everyone, it's just like, and I remember reading all the things about like the use of photography, and how like James Montgomery Flagg, was just like love like outing people who use photographs, and how Norman Rockwell was like had to do it. He felt really kind of embarrassed, but he loved the flexibility that he had achieved, that he could get by using them. And people would ask him, and hey, I heard you're using it. What's up? And it's just like, and he had to, validate his art.
It's interesting you brought that up with Norman. I should say Mr. Rockwell.
Right.
The one of my dad telling me about that trip that he made with Bernie and Fred to his studio, is that he kind of denied the fact for a long time. It was very obvious he worked from photography and he wasn't afraid of it, but he had a whole photography laid out all over the top of the table. And they kind of walked in and they're looking around, they're looking at the photography, and they were so intimidated by it. It's like they just pretended it wasn't there. They didn't want to have the conversation because they knew how we felt about it.
I wouldn't have like I wouldn't have even like, yeah, I would have been like, yeah, what photographs? I didn't see anything,
Yeah, what you're
Please
talking
invite
about,
me back, Mr. Rockwell.
Proof that the mileage you could get from his photography. It's like he would use it as a starting place, but God, he changed everything.
Yeah, and it's I was we were talking about with I remember I was talking to an artist, actually a bunch of students, about photography and the use of things like 3D models and like references everywhere, right? And I remember thinking like how important it is to study, and that's studying nature, right? And there's a story that James Gurney wrote on his blog, like a blog post that he did about Ernest Meissonier, the famous French academic painter. And they talked about how like he did this thing called it's called Fatherland or Froyland, I think it's called. It's this huge painting in the Met with all the horses galloping. It's like all the Napoleonic forces. You ever seen that one?
I can't say that I have. I
Yeah,
probably have, but I can't remember it.
It's it is insane. I'll get the correct I'll see if I can get the correct name for it, but it's absolutely insane. And I always wonder, I'm like, how did somebody put that together? Just on a basic, like just a process level.
Right.
And Gurney talked about how, you know, he was very wealthy at the time because he was really famous, you know. As a matter of fact, all of his peers thought like they all voted to see who would be remembered out of all of them when everyone was dead. And everyone was like Ernest Meissonier. And I always laugh because it's like most people are saying who, you know, and but he apparently built a scaffolding with like a railroad track, right? And on the top of the scaffolding was like an easel. And he had somebody in a horse in his backyard, basically on his lands, in full costume, on a horse. And he figured out that if he had his assistants push the scaffolding like down, you know, that's on this railroad track, as the horse was galloping, that he could get some really interesting drawings out of it. And he would have him reset and do it over and over again. And I said, you mean to tell me that if I can't use photographs, I've got to do that? That's my only other choice, you know, like, you know. So it's just thinking to myself, like, you know, okay, so if you don't want to use photographs and draw from life and galloping horse from life, you go right ahead. But, you know, like, this is what he had to employ in order to do it, you know. And I'm thinking like,
well, you think about pieces that if they were affected by photographs, if they were done with photographs, and I immediately think of like Soroya's work, you know, with the bulls coming out of the surf and all of that. It's like, how do you do that? I mean, it's like,
and it's like, I guarantee if you painted from his reference, it wouldn't look that, you wouldn't get a Soroya, folks. Like, I hate to break it to you, you know, like it's not gonna, it literally has no bearing. Yeah. It had no bearing on like how well, what their skill was, you know. It was more
if you work from Rockwell's photography, same thing. I mean, the character that he brings into those drawings are just, you know, they're so charming. They're so beautifully drawn and subtle distortion to make them more interesting.
Oh, absolutely. It just, yeah. So it's, I think with new technology, I would like complaining about it in certain aspects, like digital painting or like the use of photography, or like certain practices, like just do whatever makes you happy. Like, it's okay. Like, just, you don't, you know, we're not on this planet for that long, you know. So just make yourself happy, you know, just do whatever, you know. If you like, Drew Struzan would talk about, you know, projection, projecting photographs to get his likenesses down. And he says, you know, he does it for all of his movie poster work and a lot of, you know, all of his work. And so he talked about it like, you know, if you're an artist who wants to draw from their head alone, that's totally fine. You go ahead and do that. It's like, this is how I get the results that I get. Or this helps me get the results that I get in the timely fashion that it needs to be. But like, he almost understates his skill as an artist, because if you had his same exact projector, you wouldn't become Juice Juice. You're not going to be Juice Juice, and trust me. So, you know, it's an understanding, like you were saying. It's like, they're just tools, you know, at the end of the day.
Nobody probably used the projector as much as Bernie Fuchs did, but very few could draw at the same level that he could draw.
Yeah, you would just want to. It's not. Yeah, you're not like.
It didn't dictate the work. I'll say that.
No, much. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And like the same thing with David Grove. Like, if you saw his drawings are absolutely incredible. Like and you're thinking like, that came from that reference. Like,
yeah,
how are you pulling that out? You know, like, and so you definitely see that type of stuff,
So,
yeah,
so
anyway, so I think it's great.
I'll jump forward here and I'll ask you. So where do you think AI is going to take us?
um you know the short answer is I don't know yet because it's so early, but I would venture to guess that it's going to be it's a really powerful tool. It's gonna I think it's gonna be integrated into artistic practices. It's already starting to be. I think there's a lot of things that are extremely exciting about it. Of course, there are a lot of ethical concerns that are going to be working themselves out
Or
throughout the
not?
years, or not,
Or not? It's they're
like
just gonna. It's gonna be what it's gonna be, right?
yeah, it's going to be what it's going to be. Yeah, and it's not. It's here, and it's always going to be here, and it's going to continue to be here. So, I think it's as an artist for me, I'm always looking at it from the point of uh I guess a painter in a sense where it's like I'll always look for, what's going to make me the best images, and I think the generative properties of AI art as like a inspiration base is like incredible. I've seen work done on that, on Instagram that it's just like, wow, I could be really inspired by, all of these things, that's completely kind of this mismatch. You kind of, um, it's like ridiculous stuff, but like you can grab like, oh, I like this design. That's pretty cool. What if I combine it with this other thing that I was thinking about? That's the way I look at it, as like a reference board on steroids. Outside of the artistic issues, plugging in someone's name that the thing was trained on, but I do that in my head anyway, to be
Right.
honest with you.
Well, artists have always done it.
Yeah,
Again, it's like it's a that is the ultimate steroid of being able to do that.
right.
Uh, and and it may not be ethical. My opinion, which take with a grain of salt because I don't know that much about it, but I've just watched how, you know, lawmakers make decisions, how who's going to be making the decisions, and if it's really beneficial for other parts of the industry, the arts might get stepped on pretty hard. Um,
Yeah, and
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 just it's happened in the past, and hopefully we can, there'll be something that makes sense down the road.
I think that also in many cases also, if I absolutely agree that with that sentiment, and at the same time, if you're going to take that, it's always, and this is totally my opinion, of course, that also comes with like the idea that you as an artist can be more, if you use it with your own work too, you'll be able to do things that
Right.
you just didn't have the time to do before. And that's the thing I think about too, where it's like I go back to animation, where there was a time where like there were only huge like places like Warner Brothers, uh maybe like Terry Toons or Walt Disney. Like there were the reason why there was only a handful of people making animated movies was because it was so prohibitively expensive to make. And when things like the Xerox machine came out, well, that changed things, right? Sure, there was like you could, Xerox things like without people knowing, copying things. I'm sure there was a huge, copyright plagiarism scare, but technology advanced in such a way that it allowed people like, Ralph Bakshi, or all this whole entire like indie uh, uh, sort of movement of animators to make movies on their own. Bill Plimpton, later on, you know, um, without the confines of having to work for,
Right.
having it to come from one place. And I think that that also is a strength to it. And I always look at it in that vein too, where I'm like really excited about, the idea that that could actually happen.
actually employing it yourself. But I still think that there's always going to be a huge need for people that really understand design, really understand picture making, visual storytelling at the
Yeah.
highest level. If the tools that they're using to do it may change and will change, we'll
And
see
I
what
don't,
happens.
yeah, and I don't think telling stories with pictures is going to go anywhere. I think it's going to evolve like it always has evolved. And I
Yeah.
remember reading in the education of an illustrator, people talking about the death of illustration, but they weren't talking about the death of illustration as an art form. I think those that were unaware of their own history of the industry they were in might have thought of it as the art death of the art form, but people who understood it from a historical context just really just saw the money moving to a different part of society. So like visual development existed, but didn't exist in a way it did, like in the 50s or 60s or 70s, like it's not what it is now. I mean, now it's like this huge industry, and all the artistry coming into it, it shows, because like it's like the artistry is absolutely out of this world. Video games, these new mediums that we don't even know about, they're going to be created that are, I mean, can you imagine explaining video games to Thornton Oakley? Like what? Like or like it's just people are telling Howard Pyle that his stuff is going to be like influence like the latest God of War, or like, I just like
Better
it's
connection there would be Harvey Dunn.
Harvey Dunn, right? Yeah, yeah. Or, if Frazetta and like all these, like, just imagine like somebody like Frazetta looking at like Pong and Nintendo and thinking to myself, like, how is this going to be like? If you look at God of War, it's like, oh my God, there's a lot of Frank Frazetta in there. Like, like you would never think that, because it's like, how can that catch up? But they're going to be mediums that haven't been invented yet, that artists are going to be heavily involved in.
Yeah,
Um,
I
and
agree with that.
I just lack the foresight to see what that actually is.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
So
So
with that, I'm going to ask you a question, and
yeah,
you can keep flipping through work, but
yeah.
you've kind of given me a little bit of where you're going to go. But what's the ultimate for you? What do you want to be like 5 years down the road? What do you want to be doing? What do you want to be putting your focus in?
I just want to be able to create artwork that, to my mind, is something that I really love, that I enjoy making, and people respond really well to, and I'm able to support myself well, like be very successful doing it, in a feedback for sure, but also a monetarily, in a monetary fashion, because I think that allows me more time to do the work that I want to do and push myself. And I think that hurdle is something that I want to have under a lot more better control of. Um, in that respect, and set up my career so I can always make the things that I want to make, and give myself the uh, I try and give myself the freedom to kind of entertain that, and just be happy, because again, I uh, I was thinking a lot about this over the years, and especially now. um, I think like I'm a gallery artist now because I'm able to do my work and produce it in a way that allows me to share it with people, and they can share their, a part of their livelihoods with me to allow me to make more of that work. So that's the exchange. Is it because like I love galleries, like I love visiting them? But what if that changes and that idea of a gallery, the same idea is shifted into something more digital? Will I always be a physical painter? Maybe. I don't know. I don't have to, but I just don't feel like I have to kind of like tie my chain link myself to a medium or a delivery mechanism of art. I don't really care. So I love oil painting though. I absolutely love it, and I love the history behind it, and I love having something physical for sure. You know, but I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm not gonna kill myself if or I'm not gonna like quit if I want to change my mind or beyond, you know, beat myself up, you know. So because yeah, I mean, like look at Bernie Fuchs. I mean, he wanted to become a director, and he did. He directed a bunch of commercials and stuff, and like you think, you know, he would have been, you know, can you imagine telling him like, oh no, you can't do that. You got to stay in. This is what you got to do. You got to be Bernie of, you know, the ladies magazines. And you got to just stick with like wash, you know, and that's it. That's what you do, you know, or you got to be, you know,
And
it's just
that of him doing that completely pushed him in another whole nother Bernie Fuchs we all got to enjoy.
right,
It's like the second
exactly.
coming of Bernie.
Right. And like it's just all these. I mean, your dad is such I picked Bernie because your dad's too easy of an example of like of that. But like if you look at him, he's exactly the type of career that I want to have. Someone like Greg Hildebrandt's very much the same way. It's not the content of the work that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the way the career was built, like where you set yourself up in the sense that you're able to entertain yourself and do the things that you really want to do, and that you're able to have the flexibility of moving. And I know that that's a really, you know, I'll have to work my tail off to set those circumstances up. And if I do get there, you know, I'm going to feel really lucky to do it because not many people have the luxury of that. But, you know, that's where the goal is, at least now, for me in, you know, in sort of 5 years. But it looks like I'm be painting a lot, you know, hopefully, you know, but as long as I'm creating imagery that I love to create and it's authentic to me, I think that I'm not going to, you know, I'm going to be happy. And I think at the end of the day, that's really what I just want peace of mind, and I want to be able to support my family and be happy doing the things that I'm doing. So,
I have one more question that I've written down that I wanted to get to. Maybe we'll run a minute or two over here to answer it, but what's the best advice you could give to somebody starting out? Somebody that's has skills, somebody that's trying the emerging artist.
yeah. Well, I think the best advice I can give you is first, yeah. I mean, if you have this skill, try and find something that you like doing, and that takes a lot. You know, find out who you are as a person if you haven't done that yet. And I think it's important to not do something because everyone's doing it, you know, and that be the only reason. Um, I know we all have to make livings, but you have to understand that don't don't chase don't chase fads, or like I think be careful about chasing the money too, because you'll always be kind of the person of the party. You risk being the person of the party after the party's ended, and all that's left is the mess, right? And so you could find there's it's 2023, and you could find ways of making a living doing the work that you want to do. And I think if you do that, you have that interest, and you could then plug it in to see where it fits in well. And it might not be the thing that you could have guessed, you know, but I think it's going to be, it'll be something that allows you to produce the best work that you can and really shine as an individual. And I think leaving school too, if you're still in school and you're about to leave school, um, leaving school is the best thing for that, because you really find out what you like. Because when you got to wake up and you have a day job and you're supporting yourself, and you're coming home and you have maybe 2 or 3 hours before you go to sleep, so you can get to sleep and wake up the next day to go to your day job, you're going to find the thing that you really want to do in those 3 hours, right? In terms of making artwork. And so I think that's something that I would, you know, just be sensitive to that.
Well, before we stop up, first I want to say something about you. and I'm going to take it. I'm going to make it historical because I know you love that. And kind of conversation I picked up on listening to my father and Fred Ottness and Bernie and Robert Heindel talk about other artists. It was like a term that they used, and they would always say, "That's a serious artist," and it became like a point of pride that they took it very seriously. And when they complimented somebody, the best compliment they could give them was, "That's a really serious artist," and you are a very serious artist, Ray.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for doing this. I would like you to do one thing before you go. I would like to kind of make this a standard, is that you got so much stuff going on. What's the next big show you have? What do you want to promote?
So
anything you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm currently, the biggest thing I'm working on now is a solo show in Meibohm Fine Arts in November. Be showing 20 brand new paintings. So that's going to be great. And hopefully, if we can get the timing right, I'm also going to produce a book of just collected work. And so hopefully that will come out. We're trying to get it so that it comes out at the same time. And so, and then outside of that, I'm also teaching a visual arts passage for the commercial gallery program. And I'm teaching it in the second half, or the second class, that focuses on like inventory and understanding how to maintain yourself as an artist, and amongst other things. And I'm really excited to be teaching that, because
you are the guy to teach that, and the individual to teach that, and that's why I asked you to. So Raymond, you're awesome, man. Thank you so much for doing this with me. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I could do this all night. Ray made a joke today that, hey, I'm going to call you and we're going to have a 5-minute phone call. Those 5-minute phone calls always end up being an hour plus. And
yeah. So we had to cut this talk pretty short by our standards, right, John?
That's right. That's right. A lot of common ground.
Yeah.
Ray, thank you so much. Everybody have a great night.